Welcome to Spooky Pasta, the place where nightmares come to life. The Dogman is back, ladies and gentlemen. And today's story is a continuation of yesterday's. My life was saved by a Dogman hunter. Before we start today's story, let me ask you guys, what kind of stories would you prefer to listen to? Dogmen, skinwalkers, ghosts, police, or military encounters with the supernatural or cryptids? Or maybe park ranger encounters with unexplained creatures or whatever. Just let me know in the comments what you guys like to hear, and I'll cover the stories you guys want to listen to. Now let's get into our story. The creature in the woods came back, with tragic results. By Call Me Star. Many months had passed since I was nearly pulverized by the creature in the woods. I was with my buddy Joe when it happened, up in northern Ontario. We'd gotten ourselves lost in the dark of the forest, where monsters are known to prowl in the shadows of towering trees. Up here, monsters exist. Ultimately, it was Patrick who saved us. Patrick had been tracking the thing for weeks, prior to saving our hides. According to him, the creature is a result of top-secret government experiments dating back to the 1940s. He claims there are others, but none as dangerous as Dogman. We searched high and low for the creature in the woods, but to no avail. By the end of March, our band of Dogman hunters grew weary. Surely, the beast was dead. The northerly town of Kapuskasing enjoyed a brief period of normality. No more missing kittens. No more mutilated animal carcasses discarded in people's yards, or left on the side of the road for the crows to pick apart. Life moved on. People forgot. Unfortunately, we did too. We let our guard down, and it cost us big time. We'd become fast friends. Hanging out at Patrick's cabin by the lake was a nice pastime on long weekends. Last weekend was no different. Except, of course, it was different. It was a complete catastrophe. "Go grab us some firewood," Patrick said, in his thick French accent. Him and Joe were huddled by the campfire, warming their hands over the flickering flames, drinking beer. The evening was cool and breezy. The grass was wet from the previous night's rainfall. The moon hung like a bowling ball, big and round and full of holes. I forced myself off the patio chair and went in search of firewood. Behind the cabin, nearing the rim of the forest, I caught whiff of something foul, a mixture of grease and wet fur. I gagged. Figuring it was a bear, I picked up the pace. The last thing I wanted was to be bear food. Something shot through the dense woodland, a stone's throw from where I was standing, making my hair stand on end. Then it released a desperate howl. The sound filled me with dread. That's no bear. I scanned the vicinity, cursing myself for not bringing a flashlight. All I could see was lake and forest. The feeling that I was being watched was impossible to ignore. Twigs snapped. I spun around like a superhero. Two laser red eyes were peering at me through the thick of the brush. Dogman. I scampered back to camp, like a scared puppy. Patrick was yammering on and on about his precious Habs, and why they'll do better next year. He was furious. Never mess with a French Canadian when it comes to hockey, especially when you're dealing with the Montreal Canadiens. "Guys," I said, dropping the wood in front of the fire. Patrick ignored me. I tried my luck with Joe. I cried, "Something's out there." That caught their attention. In this part of the world, when someone utters that phrase, you'd better take notice. Joe and Patrick sat upright. Before I could get another word in, the creature in the woods howled. The sound ricocheted off the frigid lake like a fresh breeze. It sounded close. "Ah crap," Patrick slurred, his face twisted in torment. This is a man who prides himself on being prepared, which none of us were at that moment. "Joe," he snapped, "go grab the guns." Joe stood up abruptly. The lawn chair stuck to his backside, like something out of a Winnie the Pooh movie. He stumbled and fell face first onto the soggy ground. Not his shining moment. Patrick cursed in French. "Fine, I'll do it myself," he said, and hurried towards his heavily armed microbus. Something growled, deep and guttural. Joe shot me a look that said, "Let's go," and we raced to the safety of the cabin, slamming the door behind us. "Patrick better hurry," Joe said, gasping for air. His face looked like milk. We scooted to the window which overlooked the driveway. Patrick was fumbling for his keys, trying to unlock the hatch. He dropped the keys. One could imagine the cocktail of cuss words coming from his mouth at that moment. Nobody swears like the French. Our beating hearts sounded like bombs in the otherwise dead silent cabin. Our eyes were glued to Patrick, who'd retrieved his precious car keys. As Patrick was opening the trunk, something lunged in front of the cabin window. We screamed in unison, "Dogman." The beast was hideous. It scowled at us through the frosted glass, exposing an artillery of jagged, white teeth. Its muzzle drenched in drool. It stood on its muscular hind legs, flexing its jangly claws inches from our faces. I gasped. This was the Dogman that nearly tore me to shreds a few months earlier. The door handle turned as the creature clawed at the cabin door, trying to get inside. The beast roared, sending shivers down my spine. Then it crashed into the door. Once again, my life flashed before my eyes. The creature in the woods had come back. Now it was going to finish me off. Shots rang out, sounding like a million volts of thunder. Joe and I dropped to the floor and ate dust. Outside, Patrick was whooping and hollering and cussing in French. Joe stood up and peeked outside. The look he gave me wasn't encouraging. More shots were fired. I shot to my feet like a firecracker. Patrick's infamous Chuck Norris grin was plastered across his freckled face. In his hands was a semi-automatic rifle. The dog-like creature jumped on top of the microbus, screaming in protest. Before Patrick could take aim, the beast flew off the van and tackled him to the ground. "No!" I cried out. Terror enveloped me. My hands were shaking. My legs were butter. Joe grabbed the 12-gauge shotgun off the wall. He cocked it. Then, using the butt of the weapon, he smashed through the window and pointed the weapon. "Damn it," he said. "I can't get a line on the thing." Meanwhile, Patrick was being mauled. The menacing mutt had him pinned to the ground and was tearing him to shreds. The creature's face was a bloodied mess. Its claws clenched around Patrick's neck, squeezing the life out of him. Patrick, reaching desperately for his weapon, was covered head to toe in scratches. Fury found me. If this creature thinks it can feast on my friend, it's got another thing coming. I found a Smith & Wesson lying on top Patrick's dresser. It would have to do. I opened the cabin door, took aim and fired. Bam! The creature collapsed headfirst on top of Patrick, who quickly freed himself. He found his semi-automatic and went berserk. Joe and I stood transfixed as a bouquet of bullets pulverized the Dogman. Blood and guts and entrails exploded from its chest, like spaghetti hitting a fan, covering the beast head to toe in gore. The creature shrieked. Its crimson teeth glistened under the pale moonlight. It took a tentative step back, wiped the blood from its muzzle, then attacked. With one quick swipe, the beast tore off Patrick's left arm. "Pat!" Joe proclaimed. Joe rushed outside and shot the creature in the back. Patrick fell from its grip like a sack of stones. The beast was caked in red. It looked at Joe and charged. Joe flew into the cabin head first, making it just in the nick of time. The cabin door groaned as the beast slammed into it. The door was on its last legs. Patrick was crying for help. "We gotta save him," I said. In between bouts of hysteria, Joe was trembling. He'd nearly been Dogman food. "I know the feeling. The animal was clawing at the door, grunting. "The freezer," I said. "Of course," Joe said, reading my mind. "Dogs like food, especially meat, something this cabin has plenty of." I found a pack of frozen moose steaks from the freezer. The creature was crouched over Patrick, ready to finish him off. I whistled, stealing its attention, then tossed the meat out the door. The beast started sniffing the offering. Its tongue was dripping with blood. Patrick's blood. The dogman raised its ugly head. Then it attacked the steaks like a hungry bear. Meanwhile, Patrick's intestines spilled across his blood-stained sweater as his lifeless body lay on sodden soil, next to an arm that moments ago belonged to him. The monster was gnawing away on the frozen flesh, grunting and groaning. The sound was sickening. Joe cocked and fired. The shot went wide. "Damn it," he said, shaking his head in dismay. The dog creature dropped the meat and looked me with venom. I shot the thing square between its eyes. Bang! Blood exploded from the beast's head in every direction. I fired again, hitting it in the leg. By now I was fuming. Vengeance was mine. The creature dropped to its knees. Fresh blood ran down its face. My eyes darted towards Patrick, who was barely hanging on by a thread. Miraculously, he'd managed to prop himself up against the back of the van. He was panting. Blood was pouring out of him like wet paint. The creature cried out, sending a wave of chills down my spine. Something called back. Then another. There were others. "There must be more of them," I said, barely recognizing the sound of my voice. The howling continued. A pack of dogmen filled the endless night with song. Joe came up behind me. His eyes told me everything I needed to know. "On 3, he whispered. Joe counted. On 3, the door swung open. Joe and I jumped outside, shooting the beast again and again, its body obliterated by the onslaught of ammunition. The dogman floundered, but somehow held its ground. Finally, as our attack persisted, the creature retreated back into the thick of the forest, leaving a trail of blood and matted fur behind. Suddenly, the world went still. Patrick whimpered. "He needs a doctor," I said, fast. Joe called 911, while I stood next to Patrick, holding his one and only hand. It was iceberg cold. He was leaking a tremendous amount of blood. His eyes were barely open, his breathing shallow. Joe arrived with first aid. We tended to Patrick the best we could, but his prospects weren't good. This far north, ambulances are not waiting around the corner. They don't come on a whim. It took an hour before the helicopter arrived. Patrick was flown to the nearest hospital. The cops showed up soon thereafter with a boatload of questions. Apparently, they were acutely aware of this dogman creature and have been for quite some time. This didn't make me feel better. The thing was still lurking in the forest, not far from where we were standing. Joe and I sat around the fire until the sun came up. There was no sleep for us that night. We tried to convince ourselves that Patrick would be fine. He's the toughest guy we knew. If anyone could survive an assault of that magnitude, it's him. Meanwhile, we kept a close eye on the edge of the forest, waiting for the creature from the woods to return. Patrick called the following day. Sadly, the doctors couldn't save his arm, but they did save his life. He seemed in good spirits, but was heavily sedated and unable to talk for long. The weight of the world fell from our shoulders. I wouldn't worry too much about Patrick. Knowing him, he's plotting his revenge as I type this. I certainly wouldn't put it past him. Word travels fast in the north. The town of Kapuskasing was once again placed on high alert. People prepared. There are creatures in the woods. Creatures that rip limbs from your body. Creatures that sink their teeth into your flesh and claw at your throat. And not just one. There are others. That said, There's only one monster on my mind as I finish typing this story. The creature who came back from the forest, Dogman.